Okay, so as we look tonight at the mystery of God, I want to start with your reflections. So when I ask you who God is to you, if you had to summarize that in a word or phrase and name who God is for you, how would you name God?
Father.
Pardon?
Father.
Father.
Creator.
Creator.
Savior.
Savior.
Forgiver.
Forgiver. I know there's a handful of y'all who come on my Tuesday night class, so you saw words from last night too.
Protector.
Protector. I love doing this exercise because every time I do it, I get different answers. Comforter.
All-knowing.
All-knowing. We have a wonderful Latin-based word for that, omniscient. All-knowing. Who is God to you? If you had to put it in a word or phrase, how do you relate to God?
Do you have Father?
I do have Father. That was the first thing I got, yes.
Sorry.
Great.
King.
King.
Shepherd.
Shepherd. Anybody else have a way that you connect with God if you name God that you don't see out on the board?
Lord.
Lord. Last evening we had the entire board filled up with words, mostly words and a few phrases that describe how people experience God or how they name God. And many of them were actually different than the ones we have on the board. There are some common ones. There are some we already have tonight that weren't on the board last evening. It was a smaller listing of names for God. And all of us connect with the mystery of God where we are on our particular journey in life. And so God comes to us in a way that we are able to receive God. So not all of us approach the mystery of God in the same way because of where we are in our life, and sometimes based on our unique journey. So I'm going to say a bit more about that later. Someone once wrote that the God that we know and understand is not God. There's some truth to that. The God that we know and understand is not God, because God is always greater than the ability of humanity to fully understand God. So the mystery of God, there was a story, I think, about Augustine, and someone asked a question about, explain to me the mystery of the Trinity, or the mystery of God, and he said it would be like pouring the ocean into a hole in the sand. The human mind is limited in our ability to comprehend the mystery of God. And so we want to start with an awareness that God is mystery and have a respect for that sense of holy mystery. I want to start tonight with one of my favorite stories of encounter with God in the Old Testament. So it speaks a lot about the mystery of God. So reading from the 3rd chapter. Meanwhile, Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. Leading the flock across the desert, he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in fire flaming out of a bush. As he looked on, he was surprised to see that the bush, though on fire, was not consumed. So Moses decided, I'm I must go over to look at this remarkable sight and see why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw him coming over to look at it more closely, God called out to him from the bush, "Moses, Moses." He answered, "Here am I." God said, "Come no nearer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground." "I am the God of your father," he continued, "the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. This moment of encounter that Moses has with the holy mystery of God is Moses' first connection to that great mystery that Moses is aware of. You know the story of Moses perhaps a bit, right? He was born in the land of Egypt at a time when his people were enslaved and his life was imperiled. He was saved by the daughter of Pharaoh, raised as a member of the Pharaoh's household, and one day he goes out and he sees an Egyptian mistreating one of the Hebrew slaves. What does Moses do at that moment? He killed him. There's something in Moses that we know right away, and that is Moses has a sense of passionate justice in his heart when he sees a weaker person being abused. And not only does he have that passion in his heart, he acts on that passion. Now the interesting thing is the next day, two of the Hebrews are fighting with each other. And Moses addresses the question with the two of them. And they say, "So what are you going to do with us? Kill us like you did that Egyptian yesterday?" So what happens to Moses? He's very human.
Flee.
He runs away. This is best not to stick around. So what I like about Moses is you see something about his character right at the beginning. He has this great sense of justice, compassion and concern, and yet at the same time he's afraid like most of us would be. So he probably expects he's going to have an easy life. He heads off and becomes a shepherd in the land of Midian. But the Lord God has other plans for Moses. And it's that moment precisely where he's shepherding the flocks and he sees this bush burning with fire. But the bush is not consumed by that fire. I always think about that bush. I think about the fire. It's the fire of God that doesn't destroy or consume. It reminds me of the passion of God that is a fire but doesn't destroy. And so Moses is drawn to that holy mystery. Rudolf Otto, the great German philosopher, once said that the sacred or the holy is a mystery that draws us to itself. It's fascinating, but there's something about that mystery that is also awe-provoking. We stand in awe of it. We see both things in this encounter, don't we? Moses is drawn to it, but then the voice of God, "Come no nearer. The place where you stand is sacred, holy ground. Take the sandals off your feet." And Moses, aware of the awesomeness of this mystery, hides his face. You know, in the entire Old Testament, our Jewish ancestors consider Moses the greatest of all human figures in the entire Old Testament. He is head and shoulders above all the others. They say he is the meekest of all people, the most humble. And it also says throughout the Old Testament, no one can see the face of God and live. But of Moses, it says at one point, he spoke to God face to face as a friend speaks to another. And we have this wonderful moment when Moses wants to see the face of God, but he is prevented from seeing the face. He sees, as it were, the God who is disappearing. He sees there's mystery there in the encounter with God, the Holy One. So we know something about God already. God is a God who reaches out to reveal himself. So otherwise we would not know the mystery of God. So we already have here in this book of Exodus God is a revealing God who reaches out to connect with humanity. I want to go on with the narrative. Pay attention, by the way, to verbs. But the Lord said, I have witnessed the affliction of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cry of complaint against their slave drivers. I know well what they are suffering. Witnessed, heard, knows. There's a great concentration of verbs here, even in the Hebrew text, a variety of verbs. Therefore I've come down to rescue them from the hands of the Egyptians and lead them out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the country of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. So indeed, the cry of the Israelites has reached me. I've truly noted that the Egyptians are oppressing them. What does this already tell us about God? What did you learn from God in that little snippet of a passage?
He hears us.
All right, that's one of the many verbs. He hears. Did you hear any other verbs? He knows. Really important word. I think in Hebrew it's yada, to know. And it describes an intimate knowing. Like when you read the text, Adam knew his wife Eve and they had a child. So it's the kind of intimate knowing that a husband and wife share. So it's not an abstract or intellectual knowing alone. It's I know what they're going through. It's a connected knowing. What is this telling us about the mystery of God? At the very heart of God is a great compassion for his people. So God is not an unmoved creator of the universe who, as the deists believe, creates the world and disappears like a clockmaker makes a clock. But God is intimately involved, knows what's going on with humanity, and not only knows it, but cares, and is willing to act on our behalf. And that's the next thing we hear. So come now, God says, I will send you to Pharaoh to lead my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. What is this telling us already about God? He's going to involve Moses in a partnership, as it were. So God evokes our human cooperation in this great story of salvation. God doesn't simply do it for us, but he involves Moses in the process. I said last evening, is Moses a volunteer like Isaiah the prophet? Does he say next boldly, here am I, send me, Lord?
No.
Absolutely not. His first answer is, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and lead the Israelites out of Egypt? The promise of God, I will be with you. So there are multiple objections on Moses' part. And the second one, but Moses said to God, when I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, if they ask me, what is his name, what am I to tell them? God replied, I am who I am. It can also be future tense. I will be who I will be, or I will be what I will be. Then he added, this is what you shall tell the Israelites, I am sent me to you. So here we have for Moses the revelation of the sacred name of God. The four great consonants that were not pronounced, so sacred was the name of God. So when Jewish people read the sacred text, they don't utter the name of God, at least the Orthodox, but they use a way of witting and they say the Lord instead of saying the sacred name of God. So the sacred name of God was only pronounced, I think, once a year on the Day of Atonement in the Holy of Holies in the temple. when the name of God would be spoken. So great was the name of God. By the way, why is Moses so interested in knowing the name of God? It was a great human analogy. If you've ever been a teacher in a classroom,
There's a lot of power with the name.
yes, there's a lot of power with a name. If you see a child get up out of the seat when he's not supposed to be out of the seat, and you say, "Scott, sit back down," you know the name of the child. You have some ability to control that child.
And if you know their grandparents' names.
Yeah, and I know your grandparents, yeah. So knowledge of the name, it gives you knowledge of the identity, which gives you a control. I don't think Moses likes the fact that he's not in control. He's trying to claim some control over this encounter with the holy mystery of God. Remember that Adam got the opportunity to name all the animals in the garden, showing that humanity has a certain control over. And it was believed in the ancient world that if you knew the name of a god, you had the ability to control that god. So Moses wants the name. The name of God, we have great philosophical reflection centuries later that it's the root of the word being. So we have a great philosophical tradition that reflects that God is being itself, not a particular being like individual created things, but being itself. Paul Tillich, the great Lutheran theologian, described God as the ground of all being. But at this point in the Hebrew text, it might simply mean something along the lines of, I will be who I will be. In other words, Moses, you're not going to control this encounter, but I will be who I will be also for you. So in a way, it's a revelation of the mystery of God's name that still keeps the holiness of God intact. Mystery is still and protected by God. So Moses doesn't have control here. Moses continues to object in different ways. God promises to give him signs. He gives him a staff that will turn into a serpent. He says in his second to the last objection, Lord, I've never been eloquent, neither in the past nor recently, nor now that you've spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech and tongue. And the Lord said to him, who gives one man speech and makes another deaf or dumb, and so forth? And he sends with Moses Aaron. So he'll be your spokesperson. And you would think by this point, after all these objections, Moses would say yes, but he says, if you please, Lord, send someone else. Then the Lord became angry and said, have you not your brother Aaron the Levite? So God is persistent with Moses. And because of that, not only does the great story of Moses unfold, but the story of all of God's people begins to unfold. And there's a beautiful connection between the mystery of Moses and God as the narrative unfolds. Moses is gut-wrenchingly honest in his communications with God. He'll say to God at one point, you know, why did you ask me to bring this people out of Egypt? You know, they're not my people. I didn't give birth to them. And at one other moment, God has a sort of a turnabout in his fair play. God says, I'm done with this people, and let my wrath consume them. And Moses, as they say, withstood God in the breach. And he argues on behalf of God's people, and God relents what he intends to do. So you have this very depiction of a very real relationship with God. This already in the Old Testament shows many important elements about the mystery of God, doesn't it? So there are two great Hebrew words that are used a lot to describe God over and over again in the Old Testament that capture something of the heart of God. One of them is hesed, the other is emet. Sometimes translated, God is merciful and true. When you see the word hesed translated in the Old Testament, it's sometimes translated love, sometimes it's mercy. One scholar said the best description he had for was heartfelt compassion, tender mercy. That was something about the heart of God that has tremendous compassion for his people. And emet, to be true, is not true in the sense that 2 + 2 = 4, but true like a friend is true to their friend. True like I will never abandon you. I will be true to you. I'm faithful. So these qualities describe how Israel experienced the mystery of God in the centuries that unfolded so profoundly, in fact, that on one level the Old Testament is a story of humanity's repeated failure before the face of God over and over again. Their self-destructive consequences of the original turning away from God manifest themselves, but at a deeper level, the incredible fidelity of God to the people, whether they are faithful or not, through their ups and downs. I want to take a moment to pause before we start looking deeper at the New Testament revelation of God, to mention a word about language. And that word about language is that because God is holy mystery, beyond anything that we will ever fully comprehend. By the way, we Christians believe God is one, yet three. We say that's the mystery of God and His unity and Trinity. There is only one God, yet God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. This is a mystery. The human mind cannot rationally comprehend how God can be one, yet three. And that's why sometimes strict monotheists believe that Christians believe in multiple gods. So we don't. We believe there's only one God, but yet God is three, a communion of persons. So we call this a mystery, but we also call it an absolute mystery. What does that mean? It means that even in heaven, when we have full awareness and knowledge, that the mystery of God will be beyond our full human comprehension. God will always be more. That's why I said earlier, the God that you know and understand, as someone said, is not God. He's beyond our understanding, our human ability. So everything we say about God is said in language, human language, and human experience that points to a mystery that's bigger than our human experience. So every word or phrase that we use to describe God is also limited. So in the language of analogy, the traditional description of using words to describe the mystery of God by way of analogy speak about the via positiva, the positive way, that we use words, which you all already did this evening, to describe the mystery of God. For example, one person said, God is king. Well, that's one way of speaking of God, which the scriptures also speak of God as king, don't they? God is king. But they also speak of God as my rock. God is my shelter. God is my shield, my place of refuge. God is my light. Father Bulso said, God is my shepherd. That goes all the way back to the Old Testament. The Lord is my shepherd. There is nothing I shall want. So these are using human experiences of realities that we know and experience in day-to-day life that we understand to speak about a mystery. So we know what rock is, we know what a shelter is. Our ancient ancestors knew what shepherds were. We know what kings are. So we have a human experience of all of these things. But by way of purifying those concepts, in the way of analogy, one has to deny what one originally affirmed, the negative way, the via negativa. So God is not rock in a literal sense. He's not a piece of granite. God is not a king like earthly people have been kings. And one of you used right at the outset, God is Father, but God is not Father in the same way that limited human fathers are Father. So I say that because it's very common for us in our prayer to speak about God as our Father, but let's say a person grows up with an extremely abusive father who was either physically or sexually abusive of their child. That person may not be able to intuitively connect with God as Father. And every time they hear it, there may be an interior negative reaction. So how do we purify these words that we use, the language that we use, to make clear who God really is, rather than our human experiences, limited as they are. And by the way, even if you had the very best father on the planet, who loved you and cared for you and did everything the way you thought he should do it, God is still greater in what we mean by Father. And so this is the third way. So the way of eminence. So we have to say God is Father, but not Father in the way that humans are fathers. God is Father in an eminent way. So when you think about the way we talk about God, we'll say things like God is not just knowing, but all-knowing. God is not just powerful, God is all-powerful. So we start using words like all, or ultimate, or the ground of all being, and we're starting to try to qualify our language. So we start moving in the direction of the way of eminence. So it's important to recognize that, because it's easy to use language to describe a mystery, but to recognize the limitations of human language and even of human thought in apprehending the mystery of God. And yet, we must speak of God. We have to use the best language that we can to describe this mystery. So this brings us to the uniquely Christian experience of the mystery of God. As profound and moving as the holy encounter that Moses had with God was in the desert of Mount Horeb, there's something infinitely more supreme in the encounter with the face of God in the Word incarnate, in Jesus Christ. When you read the prologue of John's Gospel, John says beautifully, the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh. I like the literal translation. The Word pitched his tent among us, and we've seen his glory, the glory of an only Son coming from the Father, filled with enduring love. Grace, or the law came through Moses, but grace and truth have come through Jesus Christ. So for us who are Christian, it is the face of Jesus himself, the fullest revelation of God, that defines our knowing of the mystery of God. So it is Jesus Christ in his incarnation, in his birth, in his death and resurrection and sending of the Spirit, who gives us the greatest unveiling of the great mystery of who God is. So God appears in many varied ways in human history, preparing us for that moment, but it's the incarnation of the Son of God who becomes human that reveals the face of God for us. So I always say, if you want to know who God is, you have to look at the face of Jesus. When you read the Gospels, you begin to understand more deeply the mystery of this God. When Jesus speaks about God in John's Gospel, how does Jesus speak of God? God is, Jesus will say at one point, love. God is love. Even love, by the way, is a human word that describes a human experience of love, most often between persons. So even the word God is love has to be used analogically. It's not love in the simple human sense of love, but in a transcendent kind of way. So the mystery of God who draws near to us is also always transcendent, always beyond our ability to claim and possess and to know God. And yet we do know God in the face of Jesus. That's the paradox. So there is much more to be said about the mystery of God. And we'll be unfolding this mystery as we go forward. We'll be speaking about the person of Jesus Christ. We'll be speaking about the Holy Spirit. So we're going to be unfolding this mystery in the weeks to come. But this is kind of a first taste in this mystery. Any questions?